yeah. I'm excited about the new approach, like the new schedule approach.
Yes.
Um, Going to do the plot lines separately without having to try to weave them into the episodes yet. I think that's going to be really good.
I certainly think that'll be more conducive with how we like to work.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. So we'll see. And by the way, so uh, uh, there's officially, I have no like actual aspirations as to how much we accomplished today. That's one of the other things that I really like about this, rather than trying to stick to an episode per session. We can take as long or as little as we need to discuss these plot lines and work them all out. And because then, after having really worked through all the big ideas, it really should be much more efficient to just go through and decide, sort of the sequencing of these episode to episode.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking when I said it was more conducive to how we like to work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or not work, as the case may be.
Right. You mean as like curbing ourselves and sticking within a schedule is work
Yep.
that we shy away
Yep.
from? Yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Cool. Okay. I think we are good. I think we can go ahead and start now. So if you want, oh wait, hang on a
Awesome.
second. I did forget one thing, which is I meant to turn on my webcam. I should do that.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
There we go. All right.
Okay. Are we ready?
I believe we are ready.
All right, here we go. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Pausing for the convenience of the editor. Hello, and welcome back to this brand new episode of the Silmarillion Film Project. I am your co-host, Dave Kale, broadcasting to you, if you're listening live, that is, live from Netflix headquarters in sunny, not that cold, even in the middle of the winter, Los Angeles, right in the heart of Hollywood. And I am joined, as always, by Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor. Sadly, no Tolkien maven Trish Lambert today.
Yes.
I think Trish and I are like the star-crossed podcasters who can't ever find a Friday where we're both available. But I'm feeling optimistic for 2019. We'll see.
That's good. We'll see. That's
Yeah,
awesome. And
so,
Dave, just like one sort of small side thought, like, can you imagine what you and I would have said if somebody had told us in like episode 3 of Riddles in the Dark that someday, our show would be being. We would start off with saying live from the Netflix headquarters in California, in Hollywood. We have so arrived, or you have so arrived anyway.
There's still hope for us.
Exactly. Yeah. So just all you got to do, right? You just like leave the door cracked there, and surely people at Netflix will pick this up, right? This is obviously going to become hot product. Obviously.
I definitely think so, especially after Amazon bungles it.
That's right. That's another thing I didn't really think through, Dave, is that now when we talk about the Amazon thing, this is like officially your rival now, right? You're in the opposite camp to the Amazon.
That's exactly
folks.
right.
So you are professionally positioned in opposition to the Amazon thing.
We're professional unfriends.
Right. Exactly. Okay. It's a factor we'll have to take into account moving forward. I literally didn't even think of that until just now, but that's funny.
It is sort of funny and weirdly ironic to think about. So
it is. Yeah.
Anyway.
Cool.
Should we talk about the Silmarillion?
Yeah,
especially since we're off to a bit of a late start due to me.
Yeah, no problem.
So we're excited today because we're launching a new experiment, right?
Yeah. So this is going to be our first session in which we are taking the kind of new approach, due to the much less episodic nature of the events during this. We talked about this before, how in earlier seasons, even when there was a lot of sort of ground to cover, like back in season 1, right, when we were just doing the creation of the world, still there were like a pretty clear sequence of Silmarillion text events, right, to kind of it was those seasons were more a matter of connecting the dots rather than of really kind of shaping a story exactly, if you see the difference there.
Yep.
This season is much more loose. That is, it's not like we don't have anything from the text, but what we have from the text is much more vague from a story perspective, in the sense, it's like tensions rise between the Sindar and the Noldor. Well, okay, like that's not an event. That's a that's a story arc. That's a long-term development, right? So how are we going to shape those things, and how we're going to weave them in together? Is, I feel, much more complicated this season. So we're going to be discussing these large-scale story arcs that we're going to be working into, through multiple episodes over the course of the entire season. And we're going to be thinking about these separately, and then we'll go back and shape them, having thought our way through them. So today, we're going to be talking about, we're going to try to address the Sindar Noldor tension, building up, of course, to the revelation about the kinslaying and the ban of Quenya by Thingol. And anyway, so we'll be thinking about that, and of course, in conjunction with that, we also have to think about Galadriel and Celeborn and their romance, which is going to be directly connected with this plot line, and obviously has implications for the plot line and needs to be thought about in conjunction with it. I mean, you can't very well have a very prominent marriage of a Sindar and a Noldo, in this season, without really thinking how that's going to be interacting with that overall story, or even in some ways, potentially like representative of it, or at least very influential for the overall story. So those are the things we're going to be thinking about today. Who knows if we're going to finish that, but that's all right. That's what we're going to be talking about. Real quick before we get too deep into it, just a couple of announcements I wanted to start with. First, one sort of overarching thing for the whole month of December here. At Signum, we're running a holiday special for Anytime Audit gift certificates. If there's a it's hard to buy for person on your sort of fantasy or science fiction fan on your gift list this year, consider an Anytime Audit gift certificate. A gift certificate to audit asynchronously any one of the classes in Signum's catalog. You just give a gift certificate. They pick which class they would like to do best. They can just pick from any class in our entire archive. You get access to all of the recorded materials of the class, all the print materials that are distributed in the class, and you also, as an Anytime Auditor, get access to our library resources and everything else. So it's pretty, you get your own Signum login. It's pretty cool. And we're having a special price on those. The normal tuition for Anytime Audit classes is $95, and the gift certificates are $75 for the entire month of December. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew about that, because that's a really fun and unusual gift option for the holiday season this year. Two events that are happening next week that I wanted to share about. One on Tuesday, December 11th at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. We're having our Signum Symposium discussing the spring 2019 courses. So if you're thinking about enrolling or maybe auditing in one of our spring courses in our spring semester, you can learn more about them, find out what's going on at Signum. If you've seen the list and you're kind of curious what's going on in that class, you can learn a lot more about it there at that symposium. And then on Thursday, the 13th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time is the next episode of the Mythgard Movie Club, where they're going to be discussing The Crimes of Grindelwald, the new Fantastic Beasts film, which I haven't yet seen, which I really actually want to see. But as I quite enjoyed the first one, actually.
I'm wary of it.
You're wary of it?
Yep.
Did you like the first one?
I liked the first one okay. Much the same way I like the Hobbit films, in that I like the thought experiment.
Right.
Was less satisfied with the execution. I'm all in on I really love the idea of doing a Dumbledore prequel and doing all the Grindelwald stuff. I don't understand why that had to be done within the frame of cramming it into Newt Scamander and Fantastic Beasts.
It seemed an odd choice to me, I have to admit. I mean, yeah.
And But with respect to the Dumbledore stuff, I'm also very nervous about J.K. Rowling continuing to fiddle.
Yeah, well, it is true. I mean, I guess one of the things that I would be trepidatious about it, in some ways, is yeah, that like one of the nice things about the first Fantastic Beasts film, is that it was, I don't want to say rolling free, but kind of like that. I mean, it's because it was not, part of the main canon. It didn't have. It didn't seem to show rolling looming over it in the same way that the other films did. It wasn't constrained like the other films were constrained.
Right.
But yeah, now that we're going back to the story, which is at least background to the main books, it's going to be
it's fraught.
Yeah, more fraught.
Put it that way.
I agree. But
there's a high chance of J.K. Rowling deciding, like, oh, I think I'm gonna, which I should be the last to complain about retconning, since
right.
Tolkien was an avid retconner as well. But I don't know that necessarily all of his retconning was great either. Especially like in the later days when he was really starting to think things through and stuff.
Well, yeah, especially some of his later Silmarillion retconning, or prospective retconning that never got, that like, which he never really pulled the trigger on, or rather, I should say, which Christopher opted not to put into the published Silmarillion. Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. Well. We'll see. Anyway, so
we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
This is a fun movie club session because the whole concept of the Mythgard Movie Club actually started with a session that was sort of spontaneously run on the Fantastic. It was the combo Fantastic Beasts and Rogue One session that they did last year. That really kind of inspired the whole undertaking. So it's kind of a return to their roots to come back and do the next Fantastic Beasts film. So anyway, cool. So those are the announcements. Anyway, all right, on to our content here. So our goals. These are the things we need to think about. We need to think about how the Sindar learn about the kinslaying and the impact on their relationship with the Noldor. And so, really, I want to be thinking about this, and I would expand this. Some of the other Noldor-centric plot lines listed on the bottom there are things like, how are the Feanorians getting along with each other and stuff. But one other example that I would throw out there is Vinyamar, right? So Turgon establishes his city in Vinyamar. And one of the things that the Silmarillion says about Vinyamar is that in the land of Vinyamar, under the rulership of Turgon, the Sindar and the Noldor were more like fully blended than they were in any other kingdom of all the Eldar in Beleriand. So how does that happen? Like, why does that happen? What is it about Turgon? What is it about Nevrast? How does that go down, and how does that connect to this whole story of the tension between the Sindar and the Noldor? So that's one example I would give of a Noldor-centric plot line, which is directly connected. So it's the heart of the plot, the sort of the driving force of the plot is the kinslaying issue, right? But there's also really, we need to think about the broader political situation really as well, both political and personal situation for the people involved. And then, of course, speaking of the personal situation, there's the whole Galadriel and Celeborn story, as we talked about before. So those are the overall things. So let's begin focusing on the kinslaying question, and then we can try to kind of broaden it out, I think, a bit as we go. But obviously the heart of the real sort of drama, right, between the Noldor and the Sindar is the kinslaying thing. So okay.
Yep.
So thoughts and suggestions, as usual. These are thoughts and suggestions that Marie Mithluin has put together from both her own thoughts and things that people have suggested on the discussion boards. So at first, the Noldor say only that they've come to fight Morgoth with no mention of their rebellion. Right. So they the idea here is that their arrival is so convenient, right? I mean, like Doriath is literally under siege, and the havens have been destroyed already when the Noldor arrive and drive back the armies of Morgoth. So the coincidence of their arrival at just that moment, just exactly when the Sindar needed a eucatastrophe, right? I mean, it's got to be like the first impulse of the Sindar, really all the Sindar, has to be that the arrival of the Noldor is a eucatastrophe, right? I mean, that they are the only logical conclusion that they would come to first would be that the Noldor have been sent specifically for their deliverance by the Valar, right? And the Noldor approach to this is to neither confirm nor deny this concept, right? So this is one of the first questions I have, David. I don't know what you think about this. I think that we need to have we need to establish sort of a spectrum among the Noldor, right? Some of the Noldor are willing actually to lie, right? Some of them are willing to just remain silent and allow fortuitous misunderstandings to continue, and some are uncomfortable even doing that, right? I think we need to establish a pretty clear spectrum of like how duplicitous are the Noldor willing to be, and how comfortable are the Noldor about being duplicitous in those ways. So, Dave, where do you think Fingolfin would lie on this spectrum? It's tricky, right?
Oh boy.
On the one hand, I'm tempted to correlate degree of guilt in the kinslaying with willingness to be duplicitous, right? I mean, there's got to be some kind of correlation, some kind of positive correlation there. But I don't think it can be a simple one for one, right?
Right. Well, because there is kind of a, it's because the temptation, if you committed really bad crimes, you're definitely not going to run around talking about it.
Right.
But I feel like the people who are innocent of most of all of the worst stuff are also inclined in some sense not to talk about it, because they sort of stand, the temptation is to think, well, I didn't really do that much bad, so I shouldn't be punished for it.
Right.
But the fear is that no one's going to differentiate. Understandably, they're not going to differentiate between the guy who killed your cousin and the guy who stood there and watched them kill your cousin. So
yeah.
So I do think like the more virtuous characters are going to be less inclined to overtly lie, but I think they'll be no more inclined to confess. I think maybe it'd be interesting to have one or two people whose consciences are really bothering them. But I sort of feel like maybe there's going to be a minimal party line of don't talk about it.
Don't talk about it. Yeah.
It's, and a rationalization. Look, it's not going to do anyone any good. We have a bigger mission. We're all here to fight Morgoth. We need the Sindar. Right. We won't be helping them by telling them by stirring things up and by telling them and stirring things up, because then we'll fight each other and then Morgoth will destroy us all. So
right.
So it's definitely a greater good argument to be made.
Right. Yeah, there is a greater good argument to be made. I mean, it's hard because on the one hand, I'm tempted to say clear, the sort of the obvious rationale here, right, is that just solidarity with the other Noldor.
Yep.
But that by itself is kind of not enough, I feel. I mean, it's not that it isn't a legitimate and strong motivation, but I'm not sure that feels satisfying, especially when we're talking about the children of Finarfin, right? The people whose mom was like their own kin were being slain in the kinslaying, right? So why exactly should they choose? Should it should not be a no-brainer for the children of Finarfin to choose solidarity with the Noldor instead of solidarity with the Teleri? I mean, like why should they? Why should that take automatic precedence? Even if nobody else does, they obviously do have a conflict of interest, a conflict of where their loyalties lie. And what's more, So yeah, I mean the issue you raise about sort of the pragmatism, right? Like we can't have tension separating the Teleri, the Sindar and the Noldor here because we need the Sindar to help us fight against Morgoth. But that argument is going to weigh more strongly with some than with others, right? That I think has to be a big thing for Fingolfin. He has to see that big picture, right? He's committed, especially after that dramatic moment we gave him with the knocking on the gates of Angband at the end of season 3, right? That scene that you were describing that was awesome. That was so awesome, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
We've shown Fingolfin to be committed to the defiance of Morgoth there, and so Fingolfin at least, and I would assume therefore Fingon with him, would be thinking in sort of military terms, right? Strategic terms. But I can't imagine that all of them are thinking in military and strategic terms. Turgon, for instance, jumps out as one who is unlikely to be thinking in that way. I mean, the foundation of Gondolin is not the actions of somebody who is thinking first and foremost of the tactical and strategical position of in Beleriand, right? You don't withdraw yourself into a hidden place which even your allies don't know about and plan never to come out again if your number one objective is how to, contribute to the military situation in Beleriand. So that
Right, but it is the thinking of someone concerned with, at least to some extent, self-preservation, right? Like somebody who thinks I still feel like he would be inclined to think that he's better off with Sindar allies between him and Morgoth than Sindar, who, given a chance, might capture him or kill him or his people. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, well, but then again, with Turgon, we have that remarkable situation where he is, where he has like half of his people, right? Half of the people in his kingdom, both in Nevrast and then in Gondolin, are Sindar, right? So they're also, it's not that he has personally divided loyalties in the same way that the children of Finarfin do, but I mean, again, half his subjects are Sindar, so he's accountable to them too. He has a relationship with them, so he's to Turgon, it can't be a like Noldor party line no matter what. Right? I mean, that can't be the way he's thinking, or else all those Sindar wouldn't have settled down in his kingdom and contentedly accepted him as their king, you'd think, right? Unless he's completely snowing them. So, which I don't think is the direction we want to go with Turgon's character.
No.
Yeah, so... I'm coming back to that spectrum, right, of different kind of attitudes about this whole thing. Let's think about Maedhros. What's Maedhros? Now, Maedhros obviously is the number one in the thinking first about the military position camp, right? More than anybody. Maedhros is interested in their capability of fighting against Morgoth, right?
Yep.
So that makes sense. And Fingolfin, as I said, I think would be inclined to agree with him. By the way, and this is something we might as well think about a little bit now, Maedhros and Fingolfin. So Maedhros abdicates any claim to the high kingship of the Noldor and recognizes Fingolfin as the high king. My question is, how do we handle their relationship after that? Like, and I'm thinking in particular, Fingolfin's relationship with the Feanorians in general and with Maedhros in particular, right? Because Fingolfin comes over with a certain amount of bad feeling towards his brother, right? So he's mad at Feanor, he's mad at the Feanorians, but then he comes over and his brother's already dead, right? Feanor's gone. And so already I would think it would be a little bit awkward to continue. Like, that would kind of take the wind out of his sails, right? As far as his anger at the Feanorians are concerned. Because, I mean, it was really his brother he was mad at, and his brother's now dead. And then Maedhros hands him the high kingship and submits to him. And so it seems like everything's fine, right? Is Fingolfin grateful to Maedhros? Does Maedhros and Maedhros's kind of positions, do they earn sort of extra consideration and weight with Fingolfin because like he respects Maedhros and is sort of grateful for Maedhros's gesture to, keep and establish the peace between them? Yeah. Well, Phil, this is one of the challenges. Phil asks, in the book, do they ever interact after that? No, in the book, we never see them interacting after that. But that's exactly one of the issues with this whole section of the Silmarillion, right? Again, one of the reasons that, as I was saying earlier, that makes this part of the Silmarillion story so different to talk about is that we have left the time of sequential action, right? And we've entered the period where Tolkien is just telling us, here's the basic state of affairs for several centuries, right? So what actually people did, like, we have no idea. Did, Fingolfin, they had plenty of time. They had centuries, right? Does Fingolfin pop over, to Himring once every couple decades, just to, like, have crumpets and hang out with Maedhros? Like, they could. We don't know, right? Why wouldn't they ever meet? So anyway, and at the very least, we're going to get interactions. The as far as what we're going to depict on the show is concerned, the number one, well, not seen in the technical sense, the number one moment that we have to think about is the Merith Adothad, the reunion feast that Turgon hosts in Nevrast. There we need to sort of very clearly establish what the political situation is, but we can have people meet elsewhere and at other times. Yeah. I agree, Nick, that Nick says Fingolfin should be willing to work with Maedhros, but not trust him 100%. I agree Fingolfin should be certainly not totally trusting. I think that he trusts him, 75%, maybe? I mean, more than 50. Like, I don't think he's just holding Maedhros at arm's length, right? Because I think that Maedhros would have earned a certain amount of trust from him from the very significant gesture that Maedhros made in abdicating. But nevertheless, Nick, I certainly take your point. He's not going to be just like cheerfully going along with everything Maedhros says. And yes, as Marie reminds us, nobody has forgotten Mandos' words about treachery. It's an important thing to keep in mind. Few of the Noldor are going to trust any of the other Noldor 100%. Concerning which, how much... Do we have any siblings? Apart from non-Feanorian siblings, I should specify. Of course, the Feanorians are totally dysfunctional, but among the children of Finarfin and the children of Fingolfin, do we have tensions within the families? It's so tempting to just think of them as, like, units, right? As if they automatically and completely hold together at every point. Do we have any sort of tensions there? Angrod suggests himself, right? The sort of the comparative hothead who finally shoots off and tells Thingol the whole story, right? We have some evidence in that story of, like, Finrod and Angrod not, having a bit of a separation of what they're willing to say and how they approach things. Right. So, but yeah, and I'm thinking about treachery. Like, do they actually does anybody get to the point of, like, suspecting their own siblings? Is one of the things that I'm wondering about.
Probably eventually.
Yeah, probably eventually. Galadriel.
What about her?
To what extent do people distrust her?
Oh,
What's her status among her siblings and cousins, essentially?
I think I think one fun thing to do would be to leverage, would be to sort of, would be, you know, as sort of a hat tip to Tolkien's Galadriel 3 and 4 and 5
Right,
and
right.
12.0 revisions, to maybe make them jealous, and maybe not a small part, or suspicious and not a small part jealous. Like to have at least some of the Noldor, the Sons of Feanor and stuff, to kind of not like her, but have it be because they sort of look and they see that she you know, that she kind of, there's something special about her. She has sort of a special, they perceive some special potential or destiny for her.
Right, right. And most of the Noldor are not really constituted in such a way that perceiving that is going to lead them to dislike her out of envy, right? People like Curufin would think that way, but most of the rest of them aren't going to be like that, really, right? They're not going to resent her because she's great. They might distrust what she could become, essentially. One of the things that occurs to me is that on the one hand, the Feanorians are going to dislike Galadriel because they're going to remember that she dissed their dad, right? So Galadriel is not going to be well liked by the Feanorians. But at the same time, I'm thinking that some of the other Noldor, some of her closer, well, I guess they're all, like the Sons of Fingolfin, are just as close. Well, no, they're not, because of the half-brother thing. But anyway, whatever. I think some of the rest of them are going to, at least, if not actively distrust her, be a little wary of her because they see her as the one who is most likely to become like Feanor, essentially. I mean, she's got to be on the short list of who is like the next Noldo who could go bad, right? Who could, and even the fact that she is in line to like achieve greatness, right? And that they would be aware that she is great and could be really great. I mean, that was Feanor too, right? So again, I don't think it means distrust, but there could be some concern. And yeah, Marie, exactly. She moves to Doriath, right? So she seems to separate herself from her kin, and that's not a good look. She marries a Sinda, and one of the Sinda who's closest to one of the Sindar who's closest to Thingol, right? The guy who is most, you know, the one who has banned the Noldor and banned Quenya, and the way that she's, you know, doing her like I'm the disciple of Melian thing, right? That could be seen as a red flag, right? You know, that she's aggrandizing herself. There's Galadriel moving up in the world. What's next for Galadriel, right? And I'm not suggesting there need to be like a conspiracy against her, that there should be, you know, people who are actively speaking against her or anything like that. I'm thinking this season is all about kind of playing the long game in the development of our character relationships and what characters think and how they're connected to each other and what they think of each other and things. And I've got to think that there needs to be this kind of uneasiness. And speaking of long game, of course, one of the things that we're doing, all of this is in part in the interest of setting up Galadriel's speech to Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, the moment when she says, you know, in place of the Dark Lord, you would have a queen, like, that is like, we should see in that moment, like, the fulfillment of, like, what has been looming in the background behind her, what has been a potential for her, at times an act of temptation, times when she's moved. I mean, there'll be times in the Second Age when she seems to be going there, right? When she seems to be moving in that direction, only to pull back or to be pulled back from it. I'm thinking here of the like little empire that she helps to establish in Eregion and with Khazad-dûm and stuff, right? there could be some definite concerns that she's empire building and moving toward, in her opposition to Sauron and stuff. So, I mean, there's long game with Galadriel, right? And so planting this seed of, like, this is a person who really could go bad. I mean, she is on, even though people like her, even though people still trust her, she has to be high on the list, right? On the short list of who is likeliest to fall among all of the leaders and become evil of all of the leaders of the Noldor non-Feanorian camp. So, and I think that would be really fun to set up.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot.
So, yeah, Tony suggests some might also see the marriage as a power move. Yeah. Ooh, Marie, that's a really interesting suggestion. Marie suggests Arathel as a sort of antagonist to Galadriel. The two female grandchildren of Finwë, who are very, very different from each other and aren't really kindred spirits with each other. Because it would be nice if we have anybody articulate concerns about Galadriel. It would be nice to have somebody who is not a Feanorian to say them, right? That would be interesting. I mean, I'm a little bit reluctant to take the only other female character and have that female character bash the other female character. And she's not the only other female character, but I mean, you see what I mean. It is an interesting angle, though. Did we have... See, so Nick and Marie, you guys can remind me. In our previous script outlines, did we show Galadriel as being particularly close with anyone in particular? Did we... I'm thinking among the other Noldor, among her siblings and cousins and half-cousins, back in Valinor in Season 2, and then in Season 3, did we... Yeah, Marie, I agree. If we frame it as Arathel expressing concern or worry, we don't want that. We don't want to like make it sound like like a cat fight or something like that. It should be, she shouldn't be peevish about Galadriel. She should be concerned. She should be one who sort of sees clearly the potential. Like, that's what I want, right? I want somebody who has sufficiently penetrating insight both into Galadriel's character and into how these things work, right, in order to be able to say, there is no reason for concern here with Galadriel. She was close with her cousins in Aquilonde. Okay, right. Well, that's fine. So Marie, that's excellent fodder for her loneliness and isolation. And Marie, why she would impose even more isolation on herself in a kind of punitive fashion, right? She holds herself aloof from everybody. So she's in Doriath, but she holds herself aloof from everybody in Doriath because she feels she doesn't deserve, friends and confidants because she betrayed her friends and confidants in Aquilonde, right? So, yeah. Tony suggests Idril. That's fascinating. That's a really interesting idea, Tony, because there's one of the... Idril's character is certainly going to be associated in the later Gondolin times, like in the Moghulin times, with a semi-prophetic insight, right? She's the one who sees the end coming. She's the one who insists they prepare for it. The refugees from Gondolin are able to escape because Idril and Idril alone saw it all coming, right? So the idea that Idril... And we do need to introduce Idril. We had pediatric Idril, right, in Season 3, with her mother dying and everything in the crossing of the Helcaraxa. Idril is one of those characters that we do need to reintroduce as an adult character in this season. So we do need to accomplish some stuff with Idril's character. Not much. She doesn't have to be a major figure or anything. And we could do it just visually, like, hey, look, there's Idril. Remember her? Now she's all grown up. But actually giving her a significant role in within sort of the Noldor, polity here, and interpersonal dynamics would be interesting. Idril and Arathel would be pretty close, right? You'd think Idril and Arathel would be pretty close.
Why do we think that?
Well, I mean, they're going to be living together in Gondolin. And I'm thinking that because I'm thinking it gives some really interesting angles when Maegwyn comes in, right? If Arathel was her favorite aunt, well, only aunt, but anyway, if the two of them were really close, and she needs a surrogate mother figure at this point, right? She's lost her mother. So if Arathel kind of steps into that quasi-maternal role with Idril, and then Maegwyn comes in, and Arathel dies to protect him and everything in this like tragic and climactic moment, Idril would have very conflicted feelings. I mean, Maegwyn is creepy, and she'd be well aware of how creepy he was, especially when she began to feel how inappropriate were Maegwyn's feelings towards her personally. But at the same time, like, he is the son of her, so he's like a brother figure to her, which of course makes the whole sexual attraction thing even creepier. And really kind of plays up the, incestuous angle, which is explicitly, invoked there in the Silmarillion about Maegwyn and Idril, and why Idril was so uncomfortable and creeped out by him. Anyway, so this is why I'm thinking it would be good for Idril and Arathel to be close, because it would create some really interesting psychological and character dynamics between Idril and Maegwyn down the road, and we could have a scene with where Arathel and Idril together talk about Galadriel. That could be.
What would they say?
Well, about their observations of, like, so we're going to need down the road to have somebody observe, like, somebody's got to notice that Galadriel is still unhappy. I mean, we're setting her up to be one of the most sort of emotionally scarred of all of the Noldor by the kinslaying. The one who is most haunted personally by the kinslaying. Maybe others are too, but we're not going to spend as much time with them. So she is our primary emotionally scarred person by the kinslaying. But she's Galadriel. I mean, I don't think she's going to be openly mopey and, like, breaking down, weeping, and running out of rooms or anything like that, right? I mean, we're not going to have her, she yet remains Galadriel, right? So she's going to be able to hold it in public, right? She's going to be able to put on a good show. She's going to start perfecting that, like, I am the, like, placid, wise elf queen kind of air that she's, gonna do so well later on. But somebody's got to notice, right? I feel like it would be good to have a conversation which really draws the the viewer's attention to her situation and helps to, because I think we're gonna want a little exposition, right? Even if for no other reason than it's been a long time since the kinslaying, and we need to remember exactly what's at stake there for Galadriel. And Idril, of course, was a kid at the time, right? And so might not really know. So it would be very natural for her to be asking questions of Arathel about, so Arathel could understand, right? She knows Galadriel well enough to kind of get why this was so hard for her. I mean, she was like, watched her mother die, and she was like there, and it was like, enormously conflicted, and she feels like she got drawn into a terrible situation and made a bad choice, and blames herself for the death of her own mother and all these things. And Idril is not going to know or really understand all of these things because she was too little at the time, right? So I would think that this conversation might be a good framing mechanism for that. And Idril could express, if Arathel is essentially showing sympathy for Galadriel and expressing concern about, like, that she needs healing, right? Concern about her state in that sense. Not concern that she's going bad, but concern that all is not well with Galadriel, right? Then Idril could be the one who expresses the insight about how Galadriel is in a kind of a potentially dangerous situation, right? Idril could perceive Galadriel's greatness. I mean, I think that that could even be one of the initial starting points of the conversation, is that she sees, like, Galadriel. She's not seen Galadriel for a long time. They've been separated, as elves do, right? For, like, I don't know what, decades, a century. How long's it been? Who knows, right? Since they hung out together. But Idril and Arathel have been living in Nevrost with Turgon. So she perceives, right, Galadriel, that, like, Galadriel's great. I mean, she might even say something like, in her, like, pseudo prophetic way or semi prophetic way, right? Galadriel is going to become the greatest of all of the elf queens. She is one of the greatest of all of the grandchildren of Finwë, right? She might even say that she is the greatest, and or at least has the potential to be the greatest of all of the grandchildren of Finwë. And then they talk about, but there's something wrong with her, right? Like, so why is she so sad? Why is she so much more sad than everybody else? And Arathel explains, and then, maybe Idril is like, she better be careful, and we might kind of want to watch out, because she, to express the danger that she is in. Yeah, Maria, I'm thinking of a general Merith Atherthed context for this. For this conversation, but you gotta be careful of timing, though. Well, we'll come back to that. Let's go back to the broader question of Noldor relations. Among the non-Feanorians, who are the two that are most outspokenly pro-Feanorian, right, are Arathel and Fingon, right? Anybody else? Who would be most anti? Angrod. Who else would be most resolute? Turgon. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Turgon would be most anti. Turgon and Angrod. Fingon and Arathel would be the two non-Feanorians most likely to speak up in support of the Feanorians and the Feanorian position among the rest of them. Among the children of Finarfin, right? So we've got Finrod, Angrod, Aignor, and Galadriel. Among the four, well, we still haven't solved the Orodreth problem. Yeah. Never mind. Okay, let's just keep going. I don't want to get distracted on Orodreth right now. Okay. I continue to not want to think about that. Okay. Of the children of Finarfin, who's most conflicted? So who is most, there's, because I think that we have to express, I find it hard to, I would have to suspend disbelief a lot to believe that none of the children of Finarfin, right, who saw their own kin slain and they didn't participate, right, so they don't bear the personal guilt of it that Galadriel does. But of the other, so Galadriel's a special case, but of the other three, I can't believe that all three of them are like, we are 100% Noldor party line, no problems. Like, they have got to be saying, like, we owe at least as much loyalty to the Teleri. You know, this is like we're almost as closely related to Thingol as we are to, you know, Fingolfin. So, and not quite, but close, right? So, where should we find? Somebody needs to express that. We need to show somebody, one of those children of Finarfin, very actively torn, like wanting to tell, wanting to come clean, wanting to confess, wanting to seek absolution, wanting to, feeling like he's betraying his kin in towing the party, the Noldor party line. Somebody's got to be there, right? Be doing that. So, okay, a bunch of people are mentioning Finrod as a possibility. Tony suggests Finrod. And right. Murray says, though, that Finrod has to show leadership, and I agree. We certainly see, in the text, we see Finrod as being very cautious, right? Though in some ways, he's one of the ones who holds the Noldor party line most firmly, right? I mean, even when the truth is coming out, you know, he's like, I'm distancing myself from this, right? Yeah. So, Ellen, great questions. No, Ellen, I'm seeing your questions. They're reading through a whole bunch of comments at once. So, Ellen's concern is that Fingolfin, their High King, is a kinslayer, right? And so, for any of them to betray or to think about betraying the secret of the Noldor is for them to betray their High King, right? Which, you know, is like an act of treason. The number one thing that I would say about that is that I don't think that kingship among the elves means exactly what kingship in a human nation means. Dave, do you think elves have a concept of treason? Exactly. I mean, disloyalty, yes. Betrayal, sure. But treason?
You mean like the distinction between... You mean the distinction between kind of more informal disloyalty and like actual political treason?
Yes.
I don't know. I guess to have treason, you'd need politics.
Yeah, and politics, and this is, you know, we need Dom Nardi here. Dominic Nardi is a political science PhD, and I've heard him give several talks about sort of, he loves to apply sort of modern political science analytical tools to Middle-earth politics, which often has some really interesting effects. And one of the things that I've heard him speak very interestingly and persuasively about is that, you know, one thing that you have to acknowledge when you think about the political situation is that immortality changes politics enormously, right? Like, you cannot underestimate the impact of immortality on the political situation, right? I mean, really from top to bottom. Anyway, what does it mean? Let's come at this question from another direction. What does it mean to be High King of the Noldor? What does it mean? What does that relationship imply? I mean, yeah. Yeah, no, let's just stick with that. What does it mean to be High King? What does that, like, what's the charter, of the High King? Like, what are the rights and privileges appertaining unto the title of High King of the Noldor? It certainly makes him the overall leader, right? But we never really see Fingolfin asserting leadership in the sense of domination, right? I'm going to tell everybody what to do. Do we ever see him doing that? I don't think we ever see him doing that, right? It's certainly a sign of respect. Now, Nick, I agree with you. Well, I'm agreeing with the implication of what you're saying, that Feanor seemed to have a different sense of what it meant to be High King, right? Feanor's description of High Kingship was much more absolute, right? Feanor wanted and demanded absolute obedience, and wanted to be the absolute boss. One of the things that I think that we established in season 3 is that Fingolfin is a very different kind of leader. On the one hand, his own will helped to keep the host of the Noldor together in their crossing of the Helcaraxa, and we had a lot of scenes, remember, where people were nearing despair and dying of exposure and starvation on the Helcaraxa and everything, and it was Fingolfin who kept them going and who led them on. So he is definitely a leader to the Noldor. But I guess it's one of the things that I keep coming back to, is that clearly kingship among the elves means leadership, but I don't know that it has with it a kind of the kind of authority, like executive power, right? The ability to, would they pass and enforce a bunch of laws? They would serve as judges, clearly, right? I mean, I think that would surely happen. If there were disputes, they would help to settle disputes, which would mean, I think that would be in the job description of the High King of the Noldor, right? If there were disputes among the other leaders of the Noldor, Fingolfin would arbitrate. That's got to be in his job description, you'd think, right? So Fingolfin would be concerned about some of these issues that we've just been, talking about today, about the relations, who's, how are the leaders of the Noldor relating to each other. This would be one of the primary things that Fingolfin would be thinking about. But yeah, see, Nick, exactly. I don't think they would need a whole lot of laws. I can't imagine Elvish kingdoms having like a really intricate law code. Like, are there any Elvish lawyers? I don't think there are, right? Do elves need solicitors? I don't think they do. I really don't. Yeah, see, Ellen, that's a really cool point. So Ellen is thinking about Finrod's reaction when he's, when the people of Nargothrond rise up, right, and respond against him. He does accuse them of being disloyal. But see, again, it's about like leadership and loyalty. Yes, I definitely think that leadership and loyalty are involved. But that's not the same thing as like they were his people and he was leading them and they wouldn't support him. That was bad. That was wrong. But I don't know that it's treason exactly in like a modern political sense, like that they have betrayed the state, that they have become criminals. Exactly. They did wrong. Like what he did was wrong. And he casts down his crown, showing that like he's acknowledging that they've basically unkinged him, right, by their refusal to follow his leadership. And that, again, that's wrong in them to do that. I'm not arguing that it isn't. But I am arguing that I don't think it means exactly what like that would mean in a modern human society. Can anyone think of any examples of elf laws? There's the ban, of course, Thingol's ban, obviously, which is a central element in our story this season. Can anyone think of any other concrete
Even that
examples
one,
of an
like
actual
that's like the
law?
even that one, that's like the first time I've ever thought of that as a law.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like a law in that, I mean, he decrees like everyone shall obey this decree, and there will be consequences if you don't. Right. And so in that way, it's like a law. It's at least like a law. He now, and in another sense, it's not a law, right? Because he's deliberately imposing it on people who are not under his authority, right? So in that sense, you can't exactly pass a law for foreign powers and like the citizens of foreign states, right? So in that way, it's not like a law, but it's law-ish, right? Yeah. Marie, thinking about Nargothrond here, says that like the people of Nargothrond commit rebellion, but that's not necessarily treason. It's not necessarily the same. Yeah, Tony, good. The laws of Gondolin about people not leaving. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We do get laws and customs of the Eldar. Yes. Yes, that does get developed a bit. Though we and they outlaw polygamy in retrospect, right? As everybody agrees, that was a bad idea, and we shouldn't do that again. Yeah. Yeah. So, one thing I find myself quibbling on, or wanting to quibble on, and it's not a substantive disagreement exactly. It's more of a qualitative disagreement. Murder, like yes, murder is. Everyone agrees that murder is wrong. But when you're talking about, even Kurofin admits that murder is illegal. Well, yes, but I don't think that's the issue. People agree that murder is wrong and that you shouldn't do it, right? But that it is a deviation from the legal code. Again, I'm not arguing in substance. Like, yes, like murder is not something we do, right? Everybody that people acknowledge that, but I think it's a significant difference. That is, I think that the gap there between murder is illegal and murder is wrong. The other thing that I would point out is that there's a difference. There's a difference between law and custom as well, right? But that's another thing. When you're immortal, especially when you are immortal and you're, we see this general elvish tendency to not change, right, and to even want to resist change. So customs that have been held by these same people for thousands of years certainly begin to look like laws. It's hard. I mean, I think that what I'm arguing, or not exactly arguing against, what I'm wanting to establish here is how elves think about this. I acknowledge that the word law is used. Like, for instance, when Turgon says to Eol, Ellen, as you say, by the laws of the Eldar, I may not slay you at this time, right? But what does Turgon mean when he says that, right? I'm not convinced. I mean, they use the word king too, right? And I'm not convinced that when an elf uses the word king, they mean the same thing that a human means when they talk, like a human king means, like in Rohan or in Gondor, when they talk about or that even those two mean the same thing as each other, as what they mean when they talk about their king, right? And what it means to have a king and what their relationship with their king is like. What I'm trying to tease out is the nature of their society and the nature of their interactions. It has a, and again, it's even when they use the word law, I am not convinced. I'm doing a bad job of articulating this. Okay, Dave, I think I got it. I think I've realized my stumbling point here. Here's my stumbling point. When we talk about the law, right, if one modern human being says to another, no, you can't do that, that's against the law, right? Or no, I can't do that, that would be illegal. The way that we're thinking and talking about the law is as something that exists kind of like outside and above ourselves, right? It wasn't established by us, right? It was established by our, ancestors, right? These have been the laws, and the laws can be changed and modified, and they are changed and modified. And yet, there is this sense of like the law that has been handed down to us, right? And the code into which we are born and under which we have to live. Elves wouldn't feel that way. Law would never work that way, even for later generations of elves. And certainly not for Turgon, certainly not for Curufin, certainly not for Fingolfin, right? They just wouldn't have that relationship to law, right? Even when they're talking about the laws of the Noldor, there is still a sense in which what that, like when people say the laws, and sorry, yes, I apologize, Ellen. I realize you were that was my slip earlier. I realize you were quoting Curufin, not Turgon before, about not being able to slay Eöl at this time. Anyway, let's take that example, right? When Curufin says that to Eöl, I do not believe that what he means, and I believe it of Curufin less than I believe it of almost anybody else. I do not believe that when Curufin says, I may not slay you at this time, he is saying, dude, my hands are tied. Like, personally, I want to off you right now. Like, and if I weren't restrained by this code that I have to live by, right, that I've agreed as a citizen I must comply with, or else there will be, I could be incarcerated or executed or whatever, fined or what, if not for the fact that I am compelled as a citizen to live under this code, I would act this way. But since I am, I will comply with it. That is not Curufin's. I cannot believe that is Curufin's attitude there, right? So when he says, I may not slay you at this time, right? He is, and I know he greatly wished to slay Eöl. I get that, right? But wherein lies the conflict? Again, I think it's pretty clear that he feels a conflict between so what is the law, right? The law is how they act. What higher authority does Curufin acknowledge? Is Curufin worried about the high kingship of Fingolfin? Who's he going to get in trouble with? If he were to kill Eöl, what are the consequences that Curufin feels? Right? What are the consequences? What motivation, or to think about it in a different angle, what motivation does he have to comply with a law that he really, really doesn't want to comply with? Right? I don't think it is his fear of external consequences. And again, that's what, like, but it's illegal means, right, is there will be consequences. I want to do this. I even think it might be right to do this. I saw, Nick, you were talking about, the difference between different kinds of legality versus morality, and things which are against the law but are not necessarily in every circumstance immoral, right? Like speeding is the example that Nick gives, right? Curufin might feel totally justified in killing Eol, right? So why doesn't he do it? In my mind, there's only two reasons why Curufin would not kill Eol when he really wants to, right? One would be fear of some outside circumstance. I don't think I could get away with it. I would be breaking the law. There are consequences for breaking the law, and I'm going to get in trouble if I do it. That would be one reason for him to restrain himself because something is illegal even though he really wants to do it, and himself doesn't believe it's right. I cannot believe that Curufin is well, anyway, okay. So that's one thing. The second thing is an internal conflict, right? That he believes in the law. That the law is itself, this law that he is citing, is an expression of his own moral code as well, right? That he acknowledges this is the way things are. This is what is right. You're not supposed to. We are not. So that what he is expressing is less sadly, I must comply with this external legal code, even though in this situation I disagree with it, right? Because I don't want to get in trouble. If he's not saying that, but rather expressing what is actually an internal moral conflict on his part, right? Part of me really wants to kill you, right? I really want to kill you. But another part of me says, killing him right now would not be a good thing. And Curufin has better impulse control than some of his siblings, right? Yeah, Marie, exactly. He would like to kill Eol, but he considers murder to be different from killing someone in battle. Yeah, sure. Ellen says, yeah, hey, Eol, give me an excuse and I will kill you. Yeah, exactly. If he could maneuver it into a position where he could reconcile himself to it, I think he would. But anyway, do you see what I mean? Do you see the cultural thing I'm trying to tease out here? It's that I don't want to get in trouble, and so therefore I'm complying with this cultural system that I've been born into. That's what I don't think the elves would ever do, would ever think. And again, it's so. Ellen, back to your other example, back to Finrod, right? And Finrod throwing his crown down. Again, I don't think that what he's saying is like, you guys, like, you're doing it wrong, right? You've like, you're supposed to be good subjects, and you've committed treason and you're guilty of crimes now. No, he's like, you've betrayed me, right? I was your leader. I'm still your leader. I'm trying to lead you. You've betrayed me. Like, you're rebelling against me. That is a betrayal of our relationship. And so I'm out, right? Because I have no other choice. So anyway, I mean, that's, I think it's more, this has big implications, I think, politically, as we think this through. Because again, I want to come back to the question of what does it mean to be king, right? And this is why I think we have to be very cautious. I always think we have to be really cautious about applying human stuff to elven stuff, even when Tolkien uses the same vocabulary, like king and law. Right? He uses those words, totally uses those words, but I don't think they mean the same thing for elves that they mean for everybody else. So again, what does it mean to be king, and what does it mean to be high king? More than anything else, Phil, I would call it not necessarily a translation error, but a translation issue. Absolutely. Like, what other word are you going to use, right? Here you are, you're Tolkien, or you're Bilbo, right? You're Bilbo, and you're trying to translate these elvish stories, right, for the Shire, right? If this is the sort of textual context of the Silmarillion documents, right? What word do you use? Yeah. Ellen, that's a great question. Do the Noldor give Fingolfin oaths of loyalty when he's crowned? Ellen votes yes, that they should give oaths. I wouldn't be totally anti-oath. Though at the same time, you gotta think there gotta be some kind of oath-shy folks among the Noldor, right? You know, if somebody, at the crowning of Fingolfin says, "Hey, I know, let's all swear oaths to him," you've got to think there's somebody who's going to be like, "I'm uncomfortable right now with the oath swearing." Right? Can we not do that? Right? Can we? Does anyone else see how this could possibly backfire? Yeah. And I'm tempted to go the other direction. I'm tempted to say that the oath thing is one of the signs of Feanor's deviance. Like, the, hey, swear oaths to obey me, and what is like that was a red flag with Feanor. That they shouldn't need to swear oaths, and he shouldn't demand it. Because, again, think about this from the other direction. Right? We've got Fingolfin now, right? So Maedhros says, "Oh no, you should be High King." And Fingolfin, yeah, so then what does he do? He's like, "So now, swear oaths of obedience to me," or oaths of what exactly? Yeah, I mean, I agree, Murray, there has to be acknowledgement, right? There has to be buy-in from the other Noldor. It has to mean something. It can't just be pro forma. It can't be totally pointless. But this is exactly why I'm trying to tease this out. I'm trying to figure this out. And after this, by the way, I have another related question, which is what exactly is Thingol's political position with the rest of the Sindar, and how do they see that, and how does that differ from the Noldor situation? But first things first, the Noldor situation. Lincoln suggests just instead of swearing an oath, they could all affirm their loyalty to the High King. Yes, but loyalty in what sense? Loyalty in what sense? Because you've got to think that the loyalty that is owed and even sworn to the kings, like Ellen, again, as you say, the people of Nargothrond to Finrod, right? That's got to be different from the oaths, if oaths they swear, or the loyalty that those lords themselves, like the Finrod himself, has to Fingolfin, or had at that point. Yeah. Is loyalty a word they would use? Of course, because you know what the root of loyalty is, right? Law. I mean, that's what the loi stands for from French. So, do they even use that word? Should we use that word? Okay, let's see, Nick. I like that. Okay, Nick says, recognition of his martial authority and judicial supremacy. And Nick, I think it was you who said earlier, and I apologize, the comments have been coming fast and furious here, so I know I'm not getting everybody's comments. I'm trying to get as many of them as I can here. But Nick, I think it was you earlier who said that High King sounds like primarily a military position. I too, Nick, am primarily tempted to equate High King with Commander-in-Chief, essentially, right? Like, when we're in the field against Morgoth, Fingolfin is in charge, right? No, because there's got to be somebody who is the overgeneral of the armies, right? So Fingolfin is in charge. And judicial supremacy, Nick, yeah, there's got to be somebody who can arbitrate. If there is, should there be a dispute, what are the odds that there's going to be a dispute among the leaders of the Noldor? But should there be a dispute, there's got to be somebody who can arbitrate, who can say, all right, let's sort this out, people. Yeah. And so therefore, Ellen, the meaning of Maedhros subordinating himself to Fingolfin would be in both of those contexts. He is yielding to the judicial supremacy of Fingolfin. So he's saying, which is important, because he's saying, look, if there are disagreements even among the Feanorians, conceivably, right, and certainly between the Feanorians and the people of Fingolfin, Fingolfin now has the right of arbitration, which would be a big deal. And Curufin would find that a very big deal, right? Curufin would be very reluctant to yield that, because he knows there's going to be issues. He plans to make issues, right? I mean, there's a certain amount of conspiring going on there with Curufin. He has plans. And if they, the Feanorians, do not retain that kind of arbitration authority, if they agree to yield to the arbitration of one of the guy on the other side, that's a big concession. And similarly, and I think in some ways even bigger from the point of view of the Oath of Feanor, right? They're not in charge of the war anymore, right? They're not Maedhros is not, a son of Feanor is not the leader of the armies of the Noldor against Morgoth. And that, I would think, from the Feanorian perspective, would be, or certainly from the point of view of the Oath, the biggest deal of all. So I think this is what the Feanorians would feel was at stake when the High Kingship is yielded to Fingolfin. See, no, Helen, legislative authority is exactly what I am not willing to give him. I don't think so. At least, again, that doesn't feel right to me. That does not jive with my sense of Elvish culture, and I don't think it would exactly work that way. Yeah. Ellen says, would it mean that Fingolfin has Maedhros' back against rebellious siblings? Yeah, if it came to it. See, I don't think Maedhros will go there. I don't think, if Maedhros is having an issue with Curufin or Caranthir, right, I don't think he's going to go to Fingolfin and ask Fingolfin to arbitrate. But could he? Yeah, sure. Again, I don't think he would. But I think that he could, right? Definitely. Yeah, exactly. Nick was saying the same thing, that intra-Feanorian conflict is handled by Maedhros in-house. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I don't think they would ever do that. But again, in theory, they could. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, decentralization, each one of these realms is a realm in itself. And there is no way that Fingolfin as High King is going to see himself as, like, supervising all of that he's got to ratify whatever they say. And, like, they're all in charge of themselves, right? But see, that's the thing. I think that the elves are more like that in general anyway. I don't think that any of the elves, it doesn't feel right. I think the elves are more generally anarchical. They have affiliations, right? They hold together. They stay together in friendship. But not out of a sense of duty, exactly. Not because they have to, not because the law says they should. I don't think they have to swear oaths in general in order to do that. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Marie. In practice, what it would come down to is Maedhros ruling the Feanorians and Fingolfin arbitrating between the Feanorians and his own people. Absolutely, in practice, that would be how it would go. Is that how everyone would understand it formally? Marie, it might even be. Like, we could see a sticking point, right, where I can imagine this as a conversation between Maedhros and his brothers in the beginning, right, where Maedhros tells them what he's going to do. And his brothers are like, we are not swearing anything to Fingolfin. Like, I am not going to agree to obey Fingolfin. He is not my king, right? you as our eldest brother, you as the heir of our father are gonna so basically Marie Mithros would be instituting essentially a compromise, saying, okay, you guys obey me, right? But I'm gonna obey him, right? I'm gonna agree to work with Fingolfin, but that they don't agree, like his brothers never agree to sort of go along. Okay. But Ellen, again, I'm still disagreeing with you about the whole vision of how Elvish culture works. I think is the problem. So Ellen was just saying, but they have to obey Mithros, and he's going to obey Fingolfin, so they're still stuck. Yeah, except for the word "have." That's the part I disagree with. They don't have to obey Mithros. They don't have to. They generally are going to, right? But they don't. Again, have to says that there's some external thing that's ruling over them, right? That they must comply with. There's only one reality in the Feanorian world, which is that operates like that, right? An external reality that you are compelled to obey, and that's the Oath of Feanor, right? And honestly, I think this is one of the things that's really informing my resistance to law and this kind of like obligatory civil obedience and more oaths and things, because I want the Oath of Feanor to feel like a violation, to feel unnatural, like it is deviant. It is not how things are supposed to operate. It's not just a bad oath, right? Like that's how things are normally supposed to operate. It's just that one's ugly, right? The terms of it are bad. So it's not like a bad law among the laws, right? No, I think it should feel different, like the constraint, which eventually, of course, Mithros and Maglor are going to feel weighing very heavily upon them, and which, in our construction, Amras is already feeling weighing very heavily upon him. The constraint that they have to abide by the oath that they've sworn should grate at them. That's not how it works normally. And I agree that Turgon, for instance, is a lawmaker in Gondolin, right? But even there, I don't think that Turgon makes an elaborate legal code. It just means there are customs that he imposes. Like it's part of the Gondolin package, right? He comes to his people and he's like, I've got a situation here, right? Let's go. So here's my vision. Here's my plan. Let's make Gondolin. Let's move there. I propose the following things. We're going to move to Gondolin. We're going to keep it secret. We're going to move to Gondolin. And when we get there, nobody's going to leave. And then this is what we're going to do. And all the people are like, you're the king. Let's do that. You're our leader. We agree. We're going to follow you. But I don't think that this means he's writing an elaborate judicial code that everyone's like, oh, great. Yeah, we've got to abide by all of Turgon's laws. Anyway, the oath works like that. The oath looms over them, and it feels different, right? Yeah. You do get, where strain enters in to this situation, Ellen, is with outsiders, right? So Gondolin is a classic example. And when you've got outsiders who come in like Eöl, right? When Eöl comes and they're like, well, you're not allowed to leave because that's the law. And he's like, dude, what the heck, right? I didn't vote for you, right? When that's and notice even Eöl's attitude itself. I don't think that in saying that Eöl is being deviant and weird. I think that Eöl's comment there is actually quite natural. The question of how you impose it upon outsiders is awkward. And I think it's a sign. The Gondolin idea is not a perfect idea. And we will see by the end of the Gondolin experiment that I think it's ultimately a bad thing, actually, right? Like when Turgon shuts his gates, right, and won't let anybody in, even if they are fleeing from Morgoth, hate pursued, right? That's bad. That's like and the fact that Turgon and the whole Gondolin experiment is going wrong is plainly shown when he refuses Ulmo's message in the end, right? But it's going that way, right? And there are are strains that we can see all along. And I think the imposition of law upon outsiders. You've entered into Gondolin. You didn't know what you were getting into. You have not agreed to abide by these. I mean, Eol has a point. Eol totally has a point. At least in that, okay, you know, again, the whole, like, I'm going to, like, kill my son and throw around poison javelins, like, that's not defensible, and I'm not trying to pretend that. But there, he totally has a point. And I think it does show, it's a warning sign. It's a red flag about Gondolin. So I do think that that should be awkward. When the gate guards of Gondolin are imposing the law of Gondolin, you know, imposing the customs, these things that the people of Gondolin have all agreed to do, right? Except, again, Arethel, which is another issue, as we're going to be talking about. Zach says, by agreeing to move to Gondolin, you were accepting these terms and conditions. Except, right, Eol didn't even get a chance to click I agree without reading it, right? Yeah, anyway, I think it's a really interesting situation, but to me, it fits not in a way that suggests this is the way Elvish culture works, but rather this is a deviation from Elvish culture. This is a warning sign. This is a red flag. All is not well in Gondolin, right? Gondolin itself is not perfect. And the Gondolin idea in its execution is problematic. And that those problems are going to be getting bigger and more visible over time until in the end it all kind of falls. Now, Nick, I agree. Nick is serving as prosecution attorney in the trial of Eol here. It is true that Eol was trespassing and kind of knew that. Yes, absolutely. And probably actually knew the law. It's not like he didn't know the custom of Gondolin before he went in, right? But anyway, yeah, no, it's we can argue. We will get a chance to argue Eol's case in detail when we get there. But it's definitely, I think it's definitely it's definitely an issue. Let's see, Ellen. No, I wouldn't argue that the more rigid use of laws in human culture is wrong. Exactly. I think it's a different cultural context, but I think Ellen, even among human societies, I think we in Tolkien's world, I think that we can see a variety here, right? And one of the best human societies that we see, and I'm using human really mortal, I guess, is what I mean. One of the best mortal societies that we see is, of course, the Shire, which is notably anarchical, right? And there are laws in the Shire, but there are not that many laws, and there is no king. Not in the sense that there is a king in Rohan or Gondor, and nobody commits murder anyway, right? Nobody appears to. Okay, there are some people who apparently feel inclined, but anyway, yeah. So anyway, yeah, exactly. Ellen says hobbits get away with it because no hobbits are inclined to murder. Well, I don't know. I think there might be some inclination, right? But they don't actually do it, right? Anyway, when Lobelia is, up and goes for people with her umbrella, right? Come on now. No, but anyway, I'm joking. But the point is, again, we see a variety, and it's different. One of the differences, again, it's not necessarily about elves being morally superior to humans. Like that elves are just intrinsically more virtuous than humans are. Humans are more corrupt. I don't think you necessarily have to go there. But I bet elves also are tempted to do a lot of stupid stuff when they're young. Like under 100. Which is all humans get, right? So that the oldest, wisest, most experienced of humans who has come to see, like what is good and what is prudent and to reflect on all of this is younger than like young hothead elves, right? So when an elf lives for thousands of years, they have a different perspective on, and not to mention the fact that, like, they have to live with their choices differently too, right? So exactly, Tony, it's about the longer and wider view of the elves than humans have, right? And Ellen, exactly as you mentioned, Ellen, dumping toxic waste in rivers, right? Also the kind of thing that elves are much less likely to do, because they're going to be the ones who, a lot of the bad stuff that humans do is selfish in a way in which elves are not going to be, elves are not going to act. Like, I'm going to do something even though it's totally detrimental to the society around me, right? And to the generations who come after me. Humans can do that. They can work themselves into a place where that seems like not a big deal at all, right? Because they personally are not going to feel the consequences of it. They know that either consciously or subconsciously, and so they don't care, right? Even to say that elves aren't going to act that way is not to say that they are less selfish than humans. It's just that their selfishness, in as much as they're selfish, is going to manifest itself differently, because they would have to be, for an elf to act in a way that is like destructive to their immediate environment and society, is not just immoral, it's stupid, right? I mean, it's just dumb, it's foolish. Like, you would have to be pretty thick in the head to pollute your own environment that you're going to have to live in for thousands of years to come, right? So the more selfish and self-motivated and you are, the less you're likely to act the way that a selfish, self-motivated human would act. That's what I mean when I say that. It's just going to be different based on the nature of who they are. And Ellen, I do think you can make an argument. I mean, if people want to make an argument that, humans are sort of more intrinsically corrupt than elves, I think that that's an argument that can be made. But I'm not super interested in that argument, mostly because one of the things that we certainly see in the Silmarillion is elves doing plenty of fallen stuff, right? They like, if you want to argue that elves are not fallen and humans are fallen, you can do that argument in theory, but when it comes to practice, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between the elves and the humans in the Silmarillion as far as their own inclination towards doing bad stuff. So I prefer not to think about it in those terms, like elves are intrinsically more virtuous. But again, but it is important to think through, what would it be like actually to be an immortal person? Yeah. And Marie, you're absolutely right. Marie says not all humans behave more maturely than high schoolers just because they're older than high schoolers. And she suspects that there are some immature elves who are not young. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree. There's got to be some people. Well, because some people are dumb, right? I mean, that happens. I said you wouldn't have to just be selfish. You'd have to be stupid and foolish. I'm sure there are stupid and foolish elves. Like, that's a thing, right? It's gotta be. So yeah, I mean, it's not to say that they will never act that way. It's just, there would not be the same broad tendency for them to act, in that way. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So, yeah, good. Okay. Yeah. All right. So where are we? Let me try.
We've just gone totally off the rails.
we have. No, this is good though. I always like, these are such big and important issues, right? Because it's such a big framework. And I feel that we have to regularly it's so easy to get sucked into thinking in human terms, right? I mean, just even when you're not realizing that you are, it's really important to sort of think through. So yes, Marie, thank you for reminding me of where I wanted to go next. Thingol is king. What's Thingol's relationship with the Sindar as a whole? Because the primary difference between the Sindar and the Noldor, I often mix those up when I say them aloud too often. The difference between the Sindar and the Noldor, as far as the political state in Beleriand is concerned, is that the Sindar are much more unified. There's Círdan, yes, and there are his people who live in the Havens, but it is clear that Thingol's authority is recognized by all of the Sindar, whereas, yes, like everyone is kind of affiliated with the High King, but it's the Noldor are much more divided. The fact that they even need a High King, to arbitrate among them, is yeah. Ellen, that's a really great point. Ellen points out that the first and fundamental reality of the Sindar world is love. Their love for Elwë. They stayed, and this comes back to our discussions in season 2, right? And I really enjoyed the emphasis that we built there in season 2 about the Teleri who do not go to Valinor, or all the Teleri, right? All the Teleri end up where they go, not because they're easily distracted, right? But all of the Teleri end up where they end up because they choose this, right? Because of what they feel their own callings and purpose are. And so, as Ellen reminds us, the calling and purpose of the Sindar was to Elwë himself, right? Elwë was lost. They're going to stay and look for him. That was what they did, right? And so when they found him, he is the center of their culture in a way which is, I think, is it fair to say that would be unique in Elvish culture? I think it might be. And so therefore we could show for that reason, because so the Sindarin culture is more, okay, this is going to be a controversial statement, but I don't mean this in a strong and negative way, but it's more like a cult of personality than any of the Noldor kingdoms, exactly, right? Yeah, Nick, that's Nick guessed exactly where I was going with that. Yeah, like that. Like, again, I don't mean that I know there are lots of negative associations with that concept, but in that he as a person is really more at the center of their culture than is true of any of the Noldor individual realms, even, I would say. And yeah, Hakon points out, that's a great point, Hakon. When Elwë comes back with Melian, he's almost like a demigod or like a demi-Maya. Yes, there's this sense of apotheosis almost, right? It's not just that they found him again, right? The rejoicing of the Sindar when they find Elwë again is not just like the father of the prodigal son, right? Oh, like our leader who was lost is now found again. Hooray! Yes, there is that element, of course. But yeah, Hakon, when he comes back, he's not only just gotten married, right? He emerges from this, divine stasis with his divine wife, and he's different. He's changed, right? He has been elevated. Yes, holiness is a good way to think about it, Ellen. There's a kind of holiness about him. They would, yeah. That's a really interesting word, Ellen, because I think that would be a really neat way to spin the Sindar culture and what makes it different. There would be a reverence for Thingol that none of the Noldor would have for their kings, right? The Noldor kingships and kingdoms would be much more of a sort of first among equals thing, right? Like, we're all here and we all agree, but we follow these leaders, right? Because we respect them and we'll stick with them. But there isn't that sense of reverence. Yeah, and I agree, Ellen. It's not that he's infallible, but yeah, I like that. We wouldn't want to have an actual. We want to be careful with the reverence. Like, we can't have an actual, I think, religious, like openly religious feel to it. Like there shouldn't be actual reverence, like shrines or something like that, right? There can't. I don't think there should be religious practice because there's not even that with the Valar themselves, right? Yeah, exactly. So not worship, just reverence. Though, of course, Marie, when you say that, it makes me think that there should be somebody who crosses the line, right? In order to show that. Someone in Doriath who's a little too over the top. Yeah. Yeah. Nick, actually, it is interesting. So Nick he said initially when Elwë returns with Melian, it's like Moses descending from the mountain to the Israelites, right? And I do think it's an interesting parallel. But Nick is sort of following that up and saying, actually, come to think of it, the Sindar would regard Elwë as a kind of Moses figure. Yes, I think that's actually not a bad place to be sort of metaphor, right? I mean, or parallel. Parallel. That's the word I want. The reverence, the kind of authority that Moses had, right? The way in which he wields authority as as prophetic authority, right? Speaking for God. They don't worship Moses, but there's that reverence there. That is actually an interesting parallel. Yeah, both Zach and Ellen are thinking of Cyros as a possible one who goes a little too far. He's obviously a great option for a super questionable moral character in Doriath, definitely. Problem is, it's hard, given what we know of his character, it's hard for me to see him being a worshiper. Like, he's too... I mean, he's a fop, right? He's like vain. Anyone for whom vanity is a failing is like got to be focused on themselves, and anyone who focuses so much on themselves, it's hard for me to see them going that far in the other direction. Yeah, okay. We don't have to have a Doriath elf who crosses the line. I was just thinking about that. But okay. So yeah. Yeah, no, Ellen, that's a good way to think of Cyros. More of a hanger-on who associates with celebrity for his own glory. Sure, yeah, that I can see in Cyros, definitely. Hakon wants to see the Philothrim not treating Thingol with the same reverence. I agree. Círdan sees him as an old friend, definitely. Círdan, Olwe, and Elwë were colleagues, right? And so Círdan would definitely still see Elwë as a colleague, but I think even Círdan perceives the difference, right? Círdan, I still think there should be a perceptible difference between Círdan's submission to Thingol and, say, Finrod's submission to Fingolfin, right? Those two should not look the same. There should be more of an atmosphere of, I agree to comply with Fingolfin because I think that is the right thing, and so this is how we're going to do it, right? Whereas with Círdan, it should be more of a, he deserves my obedience. There should be an element of that reverence, of that sort of sainthood there. Yeah. Tony is thinking of maybe Dairon as one who is at least, if not over the line, on the far end of the reverence of Thingol, and that it would extend to Luthien in his mind. Yeah, that Luthien herself would then be this almost like quasi-goddess figure to him. Yeah, I kind of like that. And you're right. Yeah, you're right, Ellen. Luthien would shut him down if he started worshiping her dad openly, sure, but yeah. Yes, awe, Marie, that's a really great word to describe it. Dairon should be the most openly in awe. And it's nice because, we talked about him as being young. He's like sort of the younger generation. He's not exactly a peer of Beleg and Mablung, right? So, and Celeborn as we've constructed it, or Círdan certainly. So him having this sort of being much more in awe, much more sycophantic for that reason to Thingol, and of course coming closer, I suspect, maybe to worshiping Luthien, which is why that would set him up really well for an appropriately horrified reaction to the whole Baron situation. Yeah. I can see you guys are all thinking exactly the same directions I am with that. Yeah, that would work. Tony, I think that Círdan and the Philothrim are basically counted among the Sindar. Again, I don't think that they are as separate from the Sindar as, say, again, the people of Finrod are from, the Feanorians. I mean, there's not nearly as much gap there. They are distinct. I mean, the Philothrim follow Círdan first and Thingol second, but there's also, that's easy to do because there's no conflict between Círdan and Thingol, and Círdan's respect and even reverence for Thingol is such that there's gonna be, right? But they definitely see themselves as a people, but they're not a people apart from the Sindar. They would see themselves as a subset, but still definitely a Sindar. Yeah. Okay. Well, having established some really broad generalizations here, this is good. I wasn't even planning to go like this basic, but I think this is important. With this understanding, let's go to Vinyamar. Let's go to Nevrast. What happens in Nevrast? Why does Nevrast become the melting pot? How does Nevrast become the melting pot? Why Turgon? Why does Turgon do it? Why do the Sindar do it? Why do the Noldor accept them? Yeah. Maria, I was hoping to get to Celeborn and Galadriel today too, but I don't think it's happening. That's okay. That's okay. Let's keep doing what we got. Remember, this open-ended discussions of our plot threads. It's all good. Tony says because Turgon would prefer the Sindar to the Feanorians. Yes, but see, I don't see Turgon as looking for allies. I don't see him as sort of scheming strategically. And again, the reason I say that I can't see that as his primary is that Gondolin is not strategic in that sense. It is strategic in the sense of finding a way to protect and preserve the elves from a foreboded dark future. But the Gondolin move is the move of somebody who ultimately believes that the war with Morgoth is not going to pan out, right? If you were confident that they were going to be able to hold Morgoth in leaguer or defeat him, you don't form Gondolin, right? So there's a way in which I see Turgon kind of distancing himself, as many of the other Noldor are like, especially Maedhros, right? It's like, okay, we need to think about how we work together and how we hold Morgoth in and how we can coordinate our armies when the time comes. I see Turgon as distancing himself at first metaphorically from those discussions, in the end physically from those discussions, right? And not playing a part in that at all. So it can't be for those kinds of strategic reasons, even for intra-Noldor politics reasons. I can't. That's why I can't see that with Turgon. Marie suggests maybe Nevrast is a place for trade. Vinyamar being on the coast, it is a natural landing spot. So maybe we can show Turgon and Círdan working together more, and they're becoming a natural. I mean, yet, Marie, this seems like a really kind of simple way to talk about it, right? But Vinyamar's on the coast. So, therefore, they're going to have more contact with the Falathrim than, say, Caranthir is, right? Those who live in deeply landlocked areas are going to have less contact with the Falathrim. So even just by geographic position, Turgon and Vinyamar is going to, in Nevrast and Vinyamar are going to have more contact with. And also it's on the sort of, I was going to say like buffer zone, but it's on the, as the Sindar kind of gathered principally in the middle of the map, right? Nevrast is not right on the edge. It's not right next to Doriath, but if the Sindar are kind of moving out and exploring and interacting with folks, Nevrast is going to be one of the places that they go. So given that Nevrast is getting elves, Sindar from both directions, in a sense, they would certainly have more contact with them. Yes. And Bree, of course, you're right. We do need to recall that Turgon will have selected his city by the sea because he's the one who's spending most time looking back towards Valinor, right? Remember Mr. Gold and Silver Trees in Gondolin, right? He's one of the most westward facing of all of the Noldor, right? And ironically, that ends up connecting him with more with the Sindar. So, okay, so we can explain how the Sindar got there. Why would he welcome them? He would welcome them because he would already feel the kind of calling that Turgon feels in establishing Gondolin is to be a refuge, to preserve, and to preserve not just Noldor culture, but all of Elvendom, right? It would be kind of cool. And remember, back at the beginning when we were talking about themes, we were talking about forgiveness and reconciliation. One of the things that I was talking about was how the founding of Gondolin can be used as a way to sort of show this. And I do think that we should show Turgon beginning in this spirit, right? The spirit in which he begins his career of leader of the refuge for elves should be his reach, the Sindar come to him. Can we have him rescue somebody? Like physically rescue somebody? Should there be some, I don't know what, we could have some, surely we can have some roaming werewolves or somebody, even though there aren't orc armies roaming around the country at this point, there can still be some threats, right? Sauron is still at large and he's still doing things, right? So maybe, Sauron is sending out some exploratory, werewolf squads or something like that. They're in danger. Like there are some Sindar who are living, near their outside of Doriath, and therefore beyond the protection of the girdle. And they need and he takes them in, right? And that can be the beginning of his sort of career, right? Exactly, Ellen. The Sindar would want protection. He would be giving them protection. We would see this at the beginning. Because see, again, I'm thinking of the overall trajectory, right? I'm thinking of the history of Gondolin and the fall of Turgon, right? Turgon does fall, as is ultimately symbolized in the falling over of the tower, right, with him in it. He begins, the whole Gondolin story begins with Turgon's calling, his desire to protect and preserve as much as he can, both of elves and of like elvendom itself. He is open to all. He is wanting to protect all. So he would be, of the non-Finarfin Noldor, he would be the most proactively embracing of the Sindar, I guess, with the possible exception of Galadriel as far as embracing is concerned. But he would be one of the most proactively embracing of the Sindar, because he's thinking bigger picture. He's thinking preservation of all elvendom. But he goes from there. In the end, he goes from, give me you're tired, you're sick, you're hungry, to Gondolin being like a roach motel that you can't escape from even if you want to finally closing the doors. That's why closing the doors is such a big deal. Like, that is him turning away from his original mission, right? His whole purpose, and we can see him really betraying his purpose. Ooh, that's really neat, Marie. I really like that a lot. The impetus for protection would be the most positive way of showing grief for the loss of his wife. Yeah, I like that. That it would be connected to his grieving in like a constructive way, right? Yeah, I like that. Okay. So we know, and of course, as Ellen is reminding us, we know that there are Sindar in Mithrim and in Nargothrond as well. Now, we made the choice, or I was sort of, just for the sake of simplifying things, I was wanting to remove the Sindar from Mithrim originally, right? But we do want to get them up there eventually. Do we need a story for this? I don't know that we need a story for this. I think that we can show that happening just as a consequence of the peace, right? So they can be there, but I don't think we need to make a big deal about getting them there. Again, we need to explain Turgon, because Turgon's story is a big story. So we need to explain how Gondolin ends up becoming Gondolin. That's why it's important for Nevrast. In a sense, the presence of Sindar in Nargothrond is easier, because Finrod's related to him, right? So, I mean, some of his cousins move in. Sure, right? Why not, right? That's fine. So yeah, exactly. So we'll get elves in Mithrim, but we don't need to bother with them too much now. They're going to be important, but not for a while. They're going to be Sindar in Nargothrond, but as I say, that's not as big a deal, culturally speaking, because again, it's a natural extension. We do want to show Finrod as being more generally pro-Sindar, right? Naturally, because he's their kin, he's related to them. So he would welcome both. So the fact that there are Sindar and Noldor in Nargothrond, both, suggests, is again sort of a natural extension of his own nature, his own kind of dual loyalty, family ties. Finrod is pro everyone, Marie. Exactly. So, Yeah, that's why I wanted to focus on Nevrast, because that's where it seems to me it's the most important issue. And remember, Nevrast is going to be Turgon is going to host the Merethadothod. That's and this is why I think that makes a whole lot of sense, right? All of this that we've been saying about Nevrast in the present and Gondolin to come makes a lot of sense as that he would be hosting that. Okay. So what we haven't talked about? The kinslaying. We've totally gotten away from even the Silmarillion. Not only have we not gotten to Galadriel and Celeborn, we haven't even gotten to how the Sindar learn of the kinslaying. I think this has been a productive session.
It's possible that our new possible that our new approach is really just enabling even more wandering.
Right. But it's also possible that I'm totally unapologetic about that.
Yeah. No, that's not possible. It's guaranteed.
Yeah, you're right. That is pretty much guaranteed. Okay. We can, having set this up, we can talk a little bit, at least, about the Sindar learning of the kinslaying. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay. Having laid this groundwork, none of the Noldor want to talk about it. Many of them are guilty. To everyone else, it's at least awkward. At the very least, the people of Finarfin are saddened by it. And don't want to talk about it, and none of them want to make trouble. Yeah. One interesting point, and Marie bring this up on one of the slides that we're not getting to, but even Sauron doesn't know about the kinslaying. Nobody knows about the kinslaying. One of the plots.
Sauron doesn't know?
How would he know? Who told him?
Does Morgoth know?
Does Morgoth know?
I don't know.
Me neither. How would he find out?
I guess he wasn't there.
He wasn't there.
But it seems like the sort of thing that he would eventually he seems like the kind of guy that finds things out, right?
Right. But that's exactly the point. One of the subplots of the season, right, has to be them. So, yes, we have the Sindar figuring it out, right? But Sauron's got to figure it out. Sauron's in charge because Morgoth is away. Right. He's doing whatever he does with the humans off somewhere else. Right.
Mm-hmm.
He's still in the greater Hildorian region. Right. Orchestrating the fall of mankind. Sauron's in charge in the meantime. Sauron and Thuringwethil need to find out what happened. They're going to get wind that something was up. Right. They're going to sniff this out. And they're going to find this out. And presumably they are going to find it out sooner than the Sindar are going to find it out. Because unlike I can't see the Sindar as doing a lot of active snooping, right? Because why would they snoop? Even if they might feel that the Noldor are being strangely unforthcoming, they might find it weird at first and suspicious in the end that the Noldor don't talk about why they always awkwardly change the subject when the Sindar ask about their friends and family out in Alquilande, right? So there's going to be some confusion at first, suspicion later, but none of the Sindar are going to be initially inclined, I think, to be all let's get to the bottom of this, right? That's not going to be their first impulse. It will be Sauron's first impulse. Right, to get to the bottom of this. So he's going to be actively ferreting it out sooner, I think. Yeah. Thuringwethel would be the primary, like, watching at keyholes and listening at windows spy, right? Who could
Yeah,
overhear
definitely.
some councils, some discussions among the Noldor. Sauron himself is a shape changer, Tony, yes, and so could go among them at various points. I forget whose suggestion it was. Somebody suggested that Sauron should go among them at the Marath Adderthad. I agree. Yeah, yeah. Tony, Tony wants Tevildo to be involved. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, Tevildo as a cat, it's not like he's not capable of stealth, but I don't think this is his game. He's sneaky, but in a stealth attack ninja assault kind of way, not in a I'm a spy. Yeah, exactly. Not subtle. Subtle is not what he is. He's a hunter, and could be an assassin, but he's not a spy in the same way. I mean, a giant cat can move quietly, but it's not super inconspicuous necessarily. Yeah, that's not his role. Okay. All right. Yeah, Draugluin is his thug. Tevildo is his hunter assassin, and Thuringwethel is his spy master. Thinking of Sauron's posse here, right? Okay. What? Going back to the initial premise, the Sindar conclude, they cannot fail to conclude, that the arrival of the Noldor was eucatastrophic. It is, as Nick called it earlier, a pseudo-eucatastrophe, right? To recklessly string Greek prefixes together. It's a pseudo-eucatastrophe. But there's no way Fingolfin is going to actively play along with the idea. Like, he's not going to lie about that. If somebody asks Fingolfin straight up, did the Valar send you? He's not going to say yes, right? There's no way he's going to do that.
No, he wouldn't do that.
He wouldn't do that. Who would? Curufin would.
Curufin for sure.
Right. Would any of the non-Feanorian Noldor do that? Now, Maria, I know Curufin hates the Valar, but he would claim that they send them. I'm just saying that I'm not saying necessarily that would be his policy or his choice of strategy. I'm just asking who would do it. Like, who would tell a lie of that kind? And how do we orchestrate things such that nobody... Because it's hard for me to see any of them doing that. Being like, oh, yeah, totally. We were sent by the Valar. That's it. That's just what we were doing. Yeah. Here because the Valar sent us. And if nobody is willing to say that, it's easy to see how the misunderstanding, how that assumption would be made, and how it could be perpetuated among the Sindar who don't encounter the Noldor. But when they do meet, and when we do show them interacting, the Sindar have to bring that up, right? I mean, somebody's going to just ask the awkward question, or the question that is awkward to the Noldor. So, the Valar sent you, right? Did the Valar send you? They did, didn't they? right? What's going to happen? Do they claim not to be sent? Do they just equivocate? Owen is suggesting possibly an equivocation. Yeah. Again, we can say they avoid the subject, but see, again, that's not... This is another one of those wonderful examples of how doing an adaptation of this kind presses us to think through things in a different way. It's easy when you're writing the prose Silmarillion, right, to say something like, the Sindar assumed this and the Noldor didn't, neither confirmed nor denied, right? You can say that that's kind of the state of things. But notice Tolkien never just depicts, gives us dialogue between one of the Sindar and one of the Noldor talking about this at that time, right? I mean, we get some encounters like with Thingol later on, but we don't, when we actually have to imagine a flesh and blood Noldo and Cinda talking together, right? How does that work? How does that go?
It's really hard to imagine how they could keep this a secret for very long.
Yeah. I mean,
without some form of enforcement mechanism
or active deception, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we don't want the Noldor to be actively deceptive, either to tell lies or to deliberately equivocate with the intention to deceive, right?
I'm kind of inclined to think that I think we're going to have some form of mandated silence. I think to the extent that we want to demonstrate diversity of opinion, I think that would be done in a scene in which there's a debate over what to say and to whom.
Right.
And then that concludes with Finn Gulfin very reluctantly saying, you're banned. I prohibit any of you from talking about this with anyone who's not an Noldor. It's because that's the only way to get. That's the only way to make it not feel like if there's people who want to talk about it but feel like they're bound and cannot talk about it, then at least they're not all colluding in deception. Then they're kind of reluctantly following their king or whatever.
Right.
Otherwise we have this problem that we'll have a lot of individual characters, some of whom are are supposed to be quite heroic and virtuous, sort of very inexplicably participating in deception.
Right. Right.
Then we have Galadriel being put in the worst possible position, which is having to decide between respecting, this rule or law or whatever we want to call it, and lying to Melian and concluding that it's basically impossible to lie to Melian.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's my thinking is, at least if we have some kind of, societal ban on talking about it, then at least there's a lot of people who can be kind of innocent of active deception because they're just doing what they're told. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So forget the kings and people right now. Let's imagine a conversation between a random Cinda and a random Noldo, right? So you're in the marketplace in Nevrast, right? And you've got two people hanging out at the pub. How does the conversation go? The Cinda says, "Oh man, you've been to Valinor. How is that?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, Valinor is cool, right?" And then they're going to ask about how and why they came over. So what's the Noldor going to say? Like, so, oh man, we're so lucky that you guys came over. Like, you guys really rescued us. Is that it was so great of the Valar to send you. What does the Noldor do? Just like, you're like, right? I can neither confirm nor. So, like, what do they actually say? See, we can say that they don't want to talk about what happened in Valinor, but again, so what do they say? No, they don't want to talk about it. But what do they say? They're going to be asked. Somebody's asking you straight up. Why did you come over? What do you have to say something. You might not want to talk about it, but you have to verbally not talk about it. What do you say? You have to say something. I mean, so what, you just say nothing? You're just like...
Yep.
In which case, then what? What does this Cinda think of you? Right? How does that go? How does the whole culture proceed on this basis where we've got people living together, right? Cinda, like neighbors, right? Okay, good. We do have to imagine, and here again, I think we get back to an elvish culture issue, right? Elves would be much more patient. So, thinking for a moment about Galadriel. For Galadriel, I think this is almost easier. She could say, if people asked her about Aqualande, if people asked her about Valinor, she could say, she would not need to conceal the fact that she's upset, that she's grieving, even, right? But I would think that she could say something like, there is grief, there is grief behind me, and I do not wish to speak of it yet. And people like Melian would be like, okay, we can give you a few decades, before we'll ask again, right? Again, they can be patient. They wouldn't be prying on a daily basis, right, to see if she would talk about this. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I know that's what she says in the Silmarillion. My point is not about what she would say. My point is that she would, that they would respect that. And that would be okay. More okay than it would be. I mean, it would be weird for that to stretch out for me, the grief is still too near would not work for a human 50 years later. I mean, you could still say that, but there comes a time when the people around you are going to say, honey, it's time to move on. Let's talk about it. We kind of need to know what was going on. You can't keep saying the grief is still for me too near 50 years later, right? But for an elf, sure, yeah, still pretty near, right? Absolutely. It's only been 300 years, so it's still, the wound is fresh. I can't talk about it. Yeah, exactly. So that helps a little. But if the Noldor policy is just to stonewall all of Sindar, right? Just stonewall them. Don't say anything. Don't tell them anything. Just say you don't want to talk about it. What do the Sindar think? What do they think? How do they read that? Of course, I agree, Ellen, that the Sindar are going to become suspicious. What I am not okay with is suspicion being instantaneous. That's boring. I want to show a more interesting progression than that. And B, it's the kinslaying is unthinkable. Unthinkable. Nobody suspects the kinslaying. Nobody suspects the kinslaying. If you are in a situation where the idea of the kinslaying happening is inconceivable, literally, like they do know what that word means. It is inconceivable to them that the kinslaying is the reality of what lies behind this situation. Given that, given the inconceivability of the truth, what would they think? And I don't think their first response is going to be suspicion. Like, oh, like, we can't trust these people. If you did not have the impulse to distrust, then how would you respond? Pity? And Marie is right to point out that in day-to-day personal interactions, it can be avoided if like grief is involved, right? You can, for me, the grief is still too near. You can say when you're Galadriel having a personal conversation. But as Marie says, and I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice because I'm getting my kids cold. As Marie says, if you're the ambassador to Thingol, you can't go there. Like, you can't take refuge in that. You've got to say something. But again, I don't think suspicion can't be more than a second or third step. What I'm trying to tease out, what are the steps that come first? What's the progression? I think step one has to be pity. Right? Pity. As Zach says, something terrible happened because of Morgoth. Right? Yeah. Morgoth, who has done, they've experienced the invasion, right? The siege of Doriath. They've seen the kinds of things that Morgoth's creatures do. That's got to be what they're imagining when they know that there's a grief that lies, something is weighing heavy on the hearts of them, then they don't want to talk about it, that sadness lies behind them. So they would be responding out of pity. And Ellen, yeah, that's a really good point. Admiration, too. That the Noldor have responded to whatever was the horrible tragedy they've experienced. They've responded very admirably, right? They're fighting back against Morgoth. Despite whatever it was he did to them, they are, the Noldor, are, they've moved ahead, they've moved forward. Right, and Marie, you're right, they can reveal the death of Finwë. Would that be enough? Wouldn't explain why they don't want to talk about Aquilonde. There has to be a story. There has to be a story. Somebody has to tell something. Because at the very least, they'll guess that it has something to do with the Teleri, because that's one of the things none of the Noldor want to talk about, right? What is Galadriel grieving about? Grandpa? That doesn't explain. Grieving for Grandpa doesn't explain why she doesn't want to talk about her mom, right? The fact that Teleri were killed, the fact that there was some disaster at Aquilonde has to come out. It has to. At the very least, they have to suspect that. Right? Yeah, and as Zach says, the Noldor, of course, do feel wronged by Morgoth. And so they try to move the Sindar into thinking more in that direction, too. Sure, that they would kind of play on that. Or, like, not play on that, but, like, that's a safe place, right? That's a safe thing they can talk about. Let's talk about how Morgoth did bad things to us, right? I would think that the death of the trees would come out pretty early, right? Because that's the... If they want to... The death of the trees and the darkening of Valinor would be reason, like, by even apart from the death of Finwë personally, right? it would be a good reason to say, like, to be able to point to, like, look, tragedy. Yes, tragedy lies behind us. It totally does. Let us tell you about the death of the trees, because that's totally tragic, right? And like disaster. So disaster has struck Valinor would be the message that the not like necessarily permanent disaster, right? That Valar are going to recover, but disaster has stricken Valinor would be one of the messages that they would receive. And that by itself might be enough. Maybe that's the first step. The first step is the Teleri understand that disaster struck Valinor, and at first they think the reason the Noldor don't want to talk about this is that they're still upset about the tragedy in Valinor. Okay. Then it becomes clearer and clearer that they really don't want to talk about Aqualande too, which at first they thought maybe this is just part of the whole Valinor catastrophe thing. But it becomes clear, no, there's something about Aqualande too. Like, that there's... because like there was a catastrophe in Valinor doesn't mean that you don't want to answer questions about, like, when I ask you, how my cousin Bert is doing, you're not going to tell me about my cousin Bert, right? Like, because now I know that my cousin Bert experienced tragedy over in Valinor, so I'm keenly interested to find out how cousin Bert the Teleri is, right? So, but you're not telling me about cousin Bert. You won't talk about cousin Bert. Why won't you talk about cousin Bert? Did something happen to cousin Bert? Right? You've got to go there, right? I mean, that's got to be that. So that would be the second stage then, right? Okay, no, wait. It's not just about the darkening. Something happened at Aqualande, and the Noldor don't want to talk about it. But I still don't think suspicion is going to, because again, unthinkable, inconceivable, right? They're not going to be thinking, did the Noldor do something horrible at Aqualande? That's a later stage. Sauron is going to be the first one to suspect that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sauron will smell a rat. The Sindar will not. The Sindar will still be pity-oriented, right? Like, oh, something really terrible must have happened at Aqualande, but that was so bad that they don't even want to talk about that, right? Of course, the other thing that's going to be very apparent, those who cross the Helcaraxe, like, who are, of course, the ones who are most closely related to the Sindar, they're not going to talk about that either, because the grief from that is even fresher, right? So it is clear that the Noldor themselves have suffered a lot, especially those who cross the Helcaraxe. So the Sindar are going to, again, have motivations for pity. So the Sindar looking at them are going to be like, okay, you guys have suffered terribly. Many of you died. You had this horrible, we gather, there's this horrible experience with the Helcaraxe. So goodness, like, there was the darkening of the trees. We know what happened at the beginning, darkening of the trees. We know what happened at the end, the crossing of the Helcaraxe. Something else happened in the middle, which was also apparently terrible. But they would naturally connect those three dots, right? The thing that all three of those events have in common is terrible stuff happening to the Noldor, right? Cause for pity. The fact that it also involves their own kin in Aqualande would be anxiety-provoking, but still they would be patient in acknowledging that the Noldor don't really want to go there and dwell on all that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that the Noldor would be willing to talk about the Helcaraxe, even again, if only to give a reason to talk about something, I think the Noldor would be motivated to share traumatic experiences that aren't guilty experiences for them, right? I mean, why would you hold back a reason, like a good justification for, like, being upset about what happened in the past and not wanting to talk about it, right? You would, right? So, yeah, okay. So first they just think generic tragedy in Valinor, then they think, okay, something had happened at Aqualande, but some other disaster. Morgoth must have done something there. The ships. Could this have something to do with the ships? Did the Teleri come over with them, but all get massacred, and the Noldor still don't want to talk about it? Because Círdan, of all people, clearly can ID even the burnt out husks of the ships, right? He's got to know that those are Teleri boats. But there are no Teleri with them. Did they all die? And as we talked about before, Morgoth clearly, obviously did that, right? Who would burn the ships of the Teleri except for the creatures of Morgoth? So when Círdan first shows up at the smoking ruins of the ships, he thinks, oh my gosh, Olwe came back and Morgoth slaughtered them, right? Destroyed their ships and slaughtered a lot of them. Yeah. So how would that fit in with their speculations? Again, here I'm just continuing to try to think through this from the Teleri perspective. How do they read the non-communicativeness of the Noldor? Even assuming all of the Noldor are still playing the grief is for me too near card, right? And refusing to talk about it for that reason. Okay. So that's the other piece. So something happened in Alquilande, and it was tragic. And Teleri clearly died because people like Galadriel are grieving, and it's probably not just Grandpa, right? So there are dead Teleri involved, possibly disaster in Alquilande itself. And we have these burned out ships on the coast. That can't be a coincidence. And of course, it's not a coincidence, right? But their first thought would be that this must be the tragedy. Surely this is the tragedy they're thinking of? It's got to be, doesn't it? Have to be the tragedy they're thinking of? So why were some of the Noldor coming very painfully on foot? Maybe that's why. Oh, that would be super noble, wouldn't it? Okay, all right. So, again, I'm thinking like a Teleri here, or trying to think like a Teleri here. The Teleri and the Noldor must have been working together because the ships are evidence of that, right? So the Teleri and the Noldor must have been working together. So the Teleri were going to bring the Noldor over. Remember Círdan and Olwe. Remember that conversation we had them have back in season 2, right? I'll be the one on this side of the sea and you be the one on that side of the sea. So Círdan would assume that ferrying the armies of the Noldor back for their assault on Morgoth would be part of Olwe's gig, right? Like he would do that. So Olwe brings, he's going to ferry them over, but they don't have enough ships for all of them, right? So he brings over the Feanorians first, and then disaster strikes. And the Teleri are slaughtered and their ships are destroyed, and they're probably all dead. Well, at least all those, that were involved, not like 100% of them. All of them are involved. But the rest of the Noldor that were stranded over on the other side because the ships got burned, what did they do? Did they go home? No, they didn't go home. Did they give up? They did not give up. Did they abandon their kin? They did not. They came over across the Helcaraxa because, doggone it, that's how devoted and self-sacrificing they are, right? So this was not only a eucatastrophe, this was a eucatastrophe self-consciously undertaken in a self-sacrificing mode, right? I mean, what they gave up to come back and deliver us from Morgoth. That's got to be what the Teleri would think first, right? That's how they'd read the Helcaraxa crossing?
Definitely.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, man. Yep. So our opinion of the Noldor is only rising as a consequence of these things that we're learning, right?
I like this. I like the idea that in reflecting on it, they'll draw the wrong conclusion and esteem the Noldor even more.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, we get the crash, right? So one of the nice things about this trajectory is that it makes the shock of the truth about the kinslaying even more shocking than it was before, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Ellen, I'm not saying it's necessary to discuss the Helcaraxa, but I am saying that it is logical for them to discuss the Helcaraxa. And I see no good reason for them not to discuss the Helcaraxa. I can't think of one good reason. I can think of no good reasons for them not to discuss the crossing of the Helcaraxa. especially, I mean, like, yes, are they grieving? Yes. Was the grief too recent? Yeah, but I don't think it's a rule that I don't think that 0% of elves are willing to talk about sad things that recently happened. Like I don't think it's a natural law, right? Yes, I don't think that they'd be like super cheerful about it, but I don't think they'd hide it. And I can think of lots of reasons why they would choose not to hide it, because it's nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah. So under these circumstances, I think they are positively motivated to talk about the Helcaraxa, which would help them to overcome their reticence to revisit the tragedy. So yeah, no, I'm not saying I think it's necessary. I'm saying I think it's good, and I think the result is a cool story. So that's why I am very strongly advocating it. Okay, so the third step would be suspicion. The Sindar here figure stuff out about the tragedy in Alquilande, and they draw conclusions that tend to make the Noldor sound like heroes. Sauron would hear it and smell a rat, and begin to suspect the truth. And then he would send, spies. He would send Thuringwethil to try to get to the bottom of it. And she could then overhear like Feanorians talking about it amongst themselves and figure it out. So then step 3, suspicion. The Sindar becoming actively suspicious of the Noldor would then be a recapitulation of the unrest of the Noldor in Valinor. Just as Morgoth circulates among the Noldor, sowing unrest and prompting unhappy thoughts, right, towards the Valar, and, stoking the right fires and banking down the wrong ones, right, to try to manipulate the Noldor into going the way he wants them to go. That's the game that Sauron would begin playing with the Sindar. Yes, Marie, Sauron knows that Morgoth didn't burn those ships. Sauron doesn't know what happened in Alquilande, but he knows that part of the story is not true. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So he would be able to conclude just logically, Feanor must have done it.
Yeah.
So yes, he would, and that's why he then sends Thuringwethil. He learns the truth about the kinslaying, and then he begins to orchestrate phase 3, which is planting the seeds of suspicion. Whispers that suggest a previously unthinkable interpretation of the data that they have. And so we get, in the end, Círdan coming to Thingol with, just as Feanor himself was like speaking the lies of Morgoth, right, even as he was resisting Morgoth, so Círdan comes to Thingol with the lies, with like the manipulations and lies of Sauron on his tongue. Yeah. Ellen, I haven't said it would be trivial for anybody to talk about the Helcaraxa. I'm not trying to trivialize that at all. Quite to the contrary, how difficult it would be for them to talk about it would be part of the point. It's part of what would convey to the Sindar what a big deal it was and why they would gain an admiration for them. I'm not trivializing it at all. Quite the opposite. But just saying that they are in fact willing to talk about it is not trivializing it at all. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm liking the shape of this. I think that this works really well. Thinking of it in those 3 phases. And it could be the desire to sow these particular seeds of dissension that leads Sauron to have his, I'm gonna capture elves and like release them back and use them to plant stories and things like that. Okay. All right, cool. We are well over time, and was supposed to have started my next broadcast 5 minutes ago, so we should stop now. But I wanted to finish working that through. That was good. And it makes me feel like we actually accomplished something concrete in this episode, in this session, rather than merely discussing vague cultural things, which were still important and good to have discussed. But okay, so next time we will think about we'll definitely do Círdan and Galadriel. I want to think using Círdan and Galadriel will be a great way to focus this down to a more personal set of interactions, thinking about concrete persons, concrete members of the Noldor and Sindar interacting with each other. Not that they are the typical people meeting in a pub, of course, but yeah. Okay, cool. Good. All right. So focus on Celeborn and Galadriel for next time, and if we get further than that as well. The one thing I would point out, Marie, we did essentially do the what do we do? Some other Noldor-centric plot lines, right? Like we got Nevrast and Gondolin. We worked. So it's not like we didn't accomplish anything else. We totally crossed some of those other Noldor-centric plot lines off our list. So that was good. Anyway, okay. Galadriel and Celeborn for next time. And then if we get a chance to move on to other things, we'll also move on to other things. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening, and Godspeed.